your hands together all the way from Rehovot, Mr. Pinchas Levinson, coming to the stage. It's going to be good times. I'm going to go drink more alcohol in the meantime. Put your hands together for Pinchas, everybody.
Good evening, good evening. Yes, thank you, David. Please, a round for David, please. Okay, David. Woo! Okay, great. So you guys are mostly visitors, is that right? You live here? Yeah. You're students, the whole bit? Okay, great, great. Well, right, I do political stuff. It was a political week, right? Bibi was in Washington. You all, anybody here see a speech? Make you proud? Yeah, wow. 29 standing ovations. Whoa. What a rebuke of Obama, right? You know, of course, for him, everyone was just, doing a new kind of exercise, but he just doesn't get it, right? I mean, that Israel really sells there, I mean, I know most people think that he's got some sort of big agenda, but I think he just spent too much time in faculty lounges. He's just out of touch with the way Americans think. But of course, in the usual American manner, how did he compensate for the speech? He promised to give $1 billion to Egypt, and if that works out, maybe I'll give a little more to the United States. But everyone, of course, had criticisms. The Greens saw Bibi's speech, and they said, well, how come he couldn't write on both sides of the paper, And then Amir Peretz says to him, you said you're going to say something clearly, and then you spoke in English, what kind of crap is this, and then, of course, in the country of Tel Aviv, they say, the 67 line, doesn't that go to Dizengoff or something? Nobody really understands it. So Obama goes to Ireland, and he says, trust me, me and Israel aren't going to buy that line. That's just like too much. He goes to the Queen, and he says, I'd certainly like your Tea Party more than mine, or the Queen says, well, you want to go back to borders? Well, why don't you go back to the 1776 borders? And the Native Americans say, well, why don't you go back to the pre-1492 borders? Whatever. Borders are a great thing here to talk about in this country. But of course, Obama goes to Ireland, right, to get back to his roots, right? Okay, so out in LA, of course, where all like comedy writers are, getting back to your roots means going without hair coloring for a month, different kind of getting back to your roots. And then of course, we also had, last week we had Naqba Day, or it was 10 days ago, right? I don't know how much you guys know about this. Naqba is where the Palestinians cry, they created the state of Israel, blah, blah, blah. So the big winner, of course, one of the big winners here was Assad, right? Because, he says, look, on the one hand, here I am working with the Israelis, they killed 4 and wounded 11, we can work together. And then the other hand, he says, look, they didn't even kill one kid, the Greek Zionist entity, that's the way it goes. And the Palestinians, I don't know if you guys saw this on the news, right? They climbed, they said they climbed over the borders. They said, great, we'll take any future state you want to give us as long as you guard it like you did Majdel Shams, right? Just over the fence and in they go. Actually, the Palestinians came because they heard that there were particularly good financial benefits if you live out in the periphery. So they were all going to sign up for their apartments on that day, but it didn't happen. And then, of course, we had an Arab driver who tried to kill a bunch of people, right? So he was driving down the street, and he knocked some cars. Anyway, the bottom line is he said he was only looking for a parking spot, but that's the usual Arab alibi for what was going on. And the police said, well, maybe if it would have been a woman driver, we would have accepted it, but we didn't. Yeah, right. Okay. We don't want to go there. Okay. Anyway, so the highways here are just horrible, as I'm sure anybody who gets on that car knows, right? There was a Thai princess who was coming to visit Shimon Peres. I don't know if you heard about this. And she got into this big auto accident, right? So, first they don't let her go until they find her employer, and then in the end, it took so long, they said, well, just send in some other Thai worker and meet with Paris. Yeah, the usual story here. And then we had here last week, they passed a model law, right? Which you can't broadcast a model unless they have a certain I guess it's body mass index, whatever the life story is, you know. And of course, the model is like, oh, this is so horrible, we just want to throw up, you know. or the guys who run these agencies say, you know, look, first we got to get a minimum intelligence. You think that's easy, you know? Like, you know, the standard story. The model goes in to order a pizza, and they say to her, you know, you wanted 6 or 12 pieces, and she says, well, 6 pieces? I couldn't finish a 12-piece pizza. Anyway, that's an old one. Anyway, we had here in this country we have standardized tests, you know, for high school students. There was a math Bagrut this past week, right? Well, whatever. There's a whole bunch of stories on this. You know, they didn't give them a discount like they usually do. They took off the Nikud. They had to study everything. But of course, the questions weren't hard. The hard part, everyone said, was getting the exam 2 days before the actual date. That was the really hard part. And then, of course, you know, they're worried that there's not going to be what they call a Moed Choref, right? A winter taking of the test, because we just don't have any winters here anymore. So whatever. Everyone's got their problems. And the teachers are, of course, worried that with, you know, the September, what they're going to do with the UN, they're worried that it's going to take away from their, you know, September balagan, where they shut down the schools. And yeah, the last education item was that in Washington, right, they accused a whole slew of teachers of giving the kids answers to the tests, right? You know, prompting them and giving them answers, and you know, I mean, where were these teachers when I was in school, right? You know, it's not the same world. I was homeschooled, right? And I had a bully myself, but even so, it's just not the same quality. And it's graduation season now, of course, in America. The 250 colleges gave their gowns to their graduates made out of recycled plastic bottles, which of course is a great career idea for these people who are going to spend, you know, the next career collecting and recycling and using these bottles. Okay. Then we had this week, El Al had this plane that didn't land, right? You all saw this on the news as well? So, yeah, it was really pretty weird. They discharged all this gasoline, okay, and then, you know, you see all these Israelis running along the coast with their buckets trying to catch us. Because the El Al people said, don't worry, the gasoline's polluted anyway. So, you know, and the passengers were like, you know, I was like, I saw my whole life flash in front of me. It was like I was riding the train, you know. But that's the way things go here in Israel. Everything is kind of weirded out. And the army this week paved the road. There's a new Palestinian town called Rawabi, right? So the army this week paved the road. Of course, they didn't tell you that they already put up the blockade that's going to stop the people from getting on this road. But okay, at least this week they decided that they were going to pave the road. And this past week, yeah, Jews are always in the news, right? So the big Jew in the news, apart from us Israelis, was Dominique Strauss-Kahn, right? You know who this guy is? He's the marauding head of the IMF, right? You know, the guy who pushes $2 billion of your tax dollars out the door, you know, 3 times a day. Anyway, he assaulted this woman. Well, anyway, his story's pretty boring. But the bottom line was, he saw that here in Israel they're rewriting the laws so that prime ministers won't be charged during their tenure, and he saw the precedent, of course, of Katsav, so he put 2 and 2 together, and so he's going to be running for president here. We'll see him soon. But yeah, I love the French. They're great. In fact, it's one of my favorite jokes, as I step aside to tell you a stand-up joke, and that is that my favorite 2-word joke, ready? Pretentious, moi. Anyway, as opposed to my favorite 3-word joke, right, which is the sadist meets the masochist, and the masochist says, hurt me, and the sadist says, no. Anyway, okay, we'll get back to topical humor. So, of course, this week, Defense Secretary Ehud Barak fired the head of Israel Army Radio, right? So, you know, everyone is just aghast what he thinks this is his private fiefdom. You know, of course, Israel Army Radio belongs to the whole left. He's got to pull everybody before he can get rid of him that way. And this guy, we had this magician who got into the Guinness Book of World Records this week. He stood up for 35 hours, okay? And he said in that entire time, in the middle of Rabin's court, not a single person offered him a seat, you know. I mean, that's Israelis for you. They just don't know how to do it, you know. And of course, the big world news was that the world was supposed to end this past week, right? I don't know if you guys saw this, May 21st. Yeah, and this guy Harold Camping, this preacher. You know, first of all, it's kind of weird. You know, everyone jumped all over him. It just, you know, justifiably so. You know, but you know, when they jumped all over him, largely, of course, because he was religious. You know, I mean, when, like, say, the UN predicts that there are going to be 50 million people displaced by global tidal waves in the year 2010. Nobody, you know, do you see any of them? Are they here tonight? I don't know. Where are these? But anyway, because he's religious, they picked on him. But it was great. You know, I mean, he started toning down his predictions. He's now predicted that May will end on the 31st. Okay, you know, let's get started one thing at a time. You know, and then you know, it really wasn't that the world ended. It was just that they picked up another season. You know, so we'll go to next year. Now he predicts that the world will end on October 21st. Except, of course, if it's raining, then it'll end on the 22nd. But, you know, I mean, it was kind of weird, because I sort of half believed it, which is, of course, why all my jokes are so lame tonight. I didn't prepare. But now he says the world is going to end on the 21st, and so that's good. So I won't, of course, have to buy a Halloween costume, you know, but just sort of... And then, yeah. Hold on here, sorry. Yeah, hello. Okay, great. So the... Schwarzenegger, of course, got divorced this week, right? Or you know the story, right? 10 years ago, he told his wife that he had a child with the housekeeper, but of course it took her 10 years to figure out what he was saying. So finally, she discovered this week, and she decided to leave him. Actually, you know, he just might be a good actor for all we know. You know, it's kind of hard to say. But there was a new study that came out that says that cleaning your house can be stressful. But of course, if you ask Maria Shriver, hiring someone else to clean your house can also be stressful. You know, and then of course there's you know, the other studies are that the long-term marriages are on the up, of course, at least until, you know, 10 years later when the spouse finds out about your love child. There was a Miss Wisconsin, of course, whose crown was taken away because of an identity theft, right? Her name wasn't even Wisconsin, if you can believe it. But she got taken off. There is a gigantic new restaurant called Hello Kitty, right? A $200 million restaurant in China called Hello Kitty. Of course, which they put next to the restaurant called Goodbye Doggy, you know. And, you know, it's really weird that the PETA people say that you shouldn't call your animal a pet, right? Because it's demeaning, right? You're supposed to call them animal companions, right? Of course, except in China where they call them dinner, but you know, you have to show a little bit of respect for these animals who live with you, right? And the scientists have also this week, they came up with the magic switch for obesity, right? You know, it's called the refrigerator light. But they didn't get that far yet. And of course, the Oreo, they came up now with this new Oreo, right? Which is 3 cookies and 2 layers of cream and then another layer, right? It's called, you know, it's a 3-2, right? Because it triples your waistline and it doubles your cholesterol. You know, they were going to rename, you know, something like rocket ship to diabetes, but they figured that wouldn't sell too big. And then, of course, Disney this week put a trademark on Seal 6, right? You know, the group that you know, went in and got Obama. You know, they killed Obama. They caught his wife. They took back his porn. You know, it just sounds like a great Disney movie, right? Don't you think? Anyway, but that's the world out there. We're here tonight to talk about our people, right? And one of the things that I've certainly noticed, you know, is that Jews like that. You know, Jews drink, but they don't drink a lot, okay? Now, I don't know what your theory is on why is it that Jews aren't great drinkers. But to my mind, it's quite clear that drinking interferes with the suffering, okay? And Jews might like to drink, but they like to suffer more. I just had this discussion with my parents. Why do Jews live such a long time on this horrible Ashkenazi diet? Because if you died, then you wouldn't be suffering, you know, and that would take away from them all, whatever, the line word, no. But anyway, actually, we do have some good drinkers. My neighbor Mookie, whose parents came over on a camel from Kurdistan, he's a great drinker. I mean, you know, he can drink the table under the table, you know, and the best drink is the next drink, you know, he drinks between drinks. Anyway, but working in a bar is a great place. There's one, I worked in a bar once, and this guy comes in and he orders 3 beers, and So it comes time to pay, and I say to him, well, you know, why don't you order them sequentially? They won't get flat, won't get warm. He says, no, you don't understand. I have two brothers, right? One in Los Angeles, one in Chicago. Each time we come to a bar here, we all order beers. It's like we're drinking together. So the guy says, you know, it's all kinds of great. What do I care? You know, comes in week after week, becomes a regular customer, and then one week he comes in and he orders 2 beers. You know what to think, right? So he gets up to pay for his beers, and so I said to him, well, you know, I'm sorry to hear about your brother. And he says, brother, what happened to my brother? I said, oh, I usually order 3 beers. This time you ordered 2 beers. No, he says, you ever said I've given up drinking. Anyway, no, but bar jokes are the best, you know. You guys, I'll give you a couple standard bar jokes, you know. The dyslexic walks into the bar, you know, the fish goes in the bar says, what do you want? He says, water. You know, the tiger walks in, he orders a scotch and some peanuts, and the barman says, well, why the long pause, you know. Or the yogurt carton walks in, we don't serve yogurt, why, I'm cultured, you know, or whatever. There are a million good bar jokes out there. But the better jokes are really about my wife, who isn't here to defend herself. Lovely, lovely person, who is a black belt in shopping. She will buy anything marked down, right? She comes up with an escalator, you know. I mean, we go walking, and I have to hold her hand, or else she goes shopping, you know. She went to Milwaukee to visit her parents, and 3 stores in Rehovot closed down, you know, after a week of waiting. I mean, she is just really great. So she's got basically everything. So I asked her on her 25th wedding anniversary, what can I get you? You know, would you like, I don't know, a trip to the country, you know, up to the Golan? No, I don't know. A new living room set? No. I don't know, a trip to Europe? What would you like? No. So finally I asked her, you know, well, what is it that I can get you? And she says, well, I want a divorce. Oh, I said, I wasn't ready to spend that much, you know. Anyway, you've been a lovely audience. Thank you very much. Pinchas Levinson, The Daily Slav.